This is part 2 of the address, chapter 2 of Snapshots, the NCERT supplementary reader for class 11 English core. We know until now that the narrator has come to number 46 Marconi Street to meet Mrs. Dorling, who is not pleased to see her and sends her away. The narrator leaves with her thoughts racing back to the time her mother told her about Mrs. Dorling. Let's move on and find out what happens. Now, in the train, the narrator sees Mrs. Dorling in front of her again. She doesn't seem to have a conversation with her. Instead, her mind begins to recall the first time she had seen her in her mother's house. Her mother introduces them and gives her Mrs. Dorling's address and asks her to remember it, which clearly is an indication that they could in fact go there later to get things back when the situation was all right and when the war was over. However, fate has other plans for the narrator's family, as we now know. It now becomes clear why the narrator decided to go in search of Mrs. Dorling and Mrs. Dorling's cold reception of her. As readers, we begin to notice how cleverly Minko moves in and out of the past with her minimal use of words. Her writing is bereft of any fluff, yet so full of emotion. It's like watching a film with flashbacks interspersed into the current. Truly, she is a gifted writer. Moving on with the story, the narrator decides to go back to number 46 Marconi Street one more time. This time, Mrs. Dorling is not at home, but her 15-year-old daughter lets her in and asks her to be seated till her mother returns. In the living room, the narrator is horrified. Here, students, I would like to read a paragraph out, so please go to page 13 and to the second paragraph. I was in a room I knew and did not know. I found myself in the midst of things I did want to see again, but which oppressed me in this strange atmosphere, or because of the tasteless way everything was arranged, because of the ugly furniture or the muggy smell that hung there, I don't know. But I scarcely dared to look around me. The girl moved a chair. I sat down and stared at the woolen tablecloth. I rubbed it. My fingers grew warm from rubbing. I followed the lines of the pattern, and somewhere on the edge, there should be a burn mark that had never been repaired. The narrator immediately recognizes all the things that belong to her mother being used by Mrs. Dorling's family without much care or concern for maintenance. As the girl gets the tea ready, the narrator remarks about the things in the room, to which the girl replies that they're all antique. The narrator doesn't reveal anything to the girl about the provenance of these items. The girl goes on to say that she doesn't think much of the items, to which the narrator makes an offhanded comment, which you can find on page 13, right at the bottom. So if you could just quickly go there, let me read it out for you. You get so used to touching all these lovely things in the house, you hardly look at them anymore. You only notice when something is missing, because it has to be repaired or because you have lent it, for example. This has the girl rather confused, and she cannot quite understand what the narrator is alluding to. Their conversation continues, and at one point, the narrator talks about the spoons being made of silver, which the girl seems rather surprised by. While she gets up to look at the spoons in the drawer, the narrator suddenly decides to leave. She has had enough. She does not want to confront Mrs. Dorling another time, nor does she want to have her mother's things back. This takes us to the last paragraph of the story on page 14. So, dear students, if you can go there now, I'll read it out. At the corner of the road, I looked up at the nameplate. Marconi Street, it said. I had been at number 46. The address was correct. But now, I didn't want to remember it anymore. I wouldn't go back there because the objects that are linked in your memory with the familiar life of former times instantly lose their value. When severed from them, you see them again in strange surroundings. And what should I have done with them in a small rented room where the shreds of blackout paper still hung along the windows and no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in the narrow table drawer? I resolved to forget the address. Of all the things I had to forget, that would be the easiest. The suddenness with which the story comes to an end is rather striking. It shows us how troubled the narrator is. One moment she wants her mother's things back, and the next moment she decides against it. It makes us wonder about the permanence of memories and the impermanence of material objects. What would we rather hold on to? What do you think about the ravages of war? How does it affect those who are left behind? Is it really so easy to let go of the past? So, my dear students, I hope you now have a clearer idea of this story. It would be wonderful if you now read this all by yourself and analyzed it in the light of this commentary and attempt to answer the questions at the end of the story. If possible, do also read the other translated stories of Marga Minko. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. For now, this is Deepta Vivekanand signing off. Have a great day. Have a great day.